Hey everyone, we're going to continue with page 4 of the 6.3 notes. So let's try another example of graphing a sine wave. Here's one where we have -5 sine x. So the amplitude is that number out front, and it's just 5, not negative. The amplitude is always positive. Okay, and so we can now label the x-axis. There's 2 pi, there's -2 pi. You can label all the intermediate values if you want. I'll just do pi and -pi, and then do your sine wave. But now we have to take in consideration that there's a negative out front that reflects the graph about the x-axis or just flips it upside down. So when I do my graph, let's do this one in orange for fun. Sine always starts in the middle. But now instead of going to the maximum first, you're going to go to the minimum. And then back to the middle, and then the max, and then the middle. Right? So there's the inverted version. And then this is 5. So I hit the max and min. So I should label that too. All right, notice how that's reflected about the x-axis. The standard pattern, if I go back up, for sine wave is up and then down and then back up. I did the opposite. I went down and then up like that. That's the negative sign. Okay. And then I got to continue with that pattern in the negative direction. So it's just, I always like to put the points first because it then ends up making my graph look better for some reason. Okay. And there you go. Okay. The next thing is the period. Your period will change if you have a number in front of the x. So notice here, these graphs, there's a b in front of the x. So there's a little formula for it. Normally the period is 2 pi if there's no b, or if b is equal to 1. And if b is any other number besides 1, you can find the period by taking 2 pi divided by that value b. Okay. And then I put some steps here, just some general ways to graph anything of the form a sine bx. Right. First, I would find the amplitude and mark that as the max and the min. Then find the period with that formula. Then divide that period into 4 equal parts, because that's going to define where your key points are for your pattern. And then you just draw your pattern. Okay, so as an example, let's take a look at 2 sine 3x. Okay, so the amplitude is the number out front, and the period is 2 pi divided by the number in front of the x, which in this case is 3. And that's already reduced, so there's your period, 2 pi over 3. So if I'm looking at my graph, the maximum is 2. So let's make 1 right here and then 2 here. Right? So each line is a half. And then we have -1, -2. There, that marks my max and my min. My max is 2, my min is -2. And then I'm going to make this 2 pi over 3. Right? And then how do I get these points between 0 and 2 pi over 3? That's what I'm talking about, is dividing that period by 4. So if I take 2 pi over 3 divided by 4, that's the same as 2 pi over 3 times 1/4, which is 2 pi over 12 or pi over 6. So the value of each of these intervals is pi over 6. Here's pi over 6 right here then, 1 pi over 6. The next one would be add pi over 6, which would be 2 pi over 6. 2 pi over 6 reduces to pi over 3. The next one is 3 pi over 6, which reduces to pi over 2. And then the last one is 4 pi over 6, which we already have because that reduces to 2 pi over 3. Okay, so that's how I label my x-axis. And then in the negative direction, it's the same, just all the values are negative. Okay, and I've got it labeled. All right, once I've got it labeled, I'm ready for my step 4, draw the sine or cosine pattern. Here we have sine, so I'm going to do the sine pattern. The sine is middle, top, middle, bottom, middle. There it is. There's your graph. All right. And then same pattern in the negative, on the negative side. Okay. So there we go. Pretty fun, right? Okay. Let's try another one. Here we have 4 cosine half x. Okay, so go back to blue, the pretty blue, 4 for the amplitude. And then the period is a half. I mean, the b is a half. So period is 2 pi divided by a half, which is the same as 2 pi times the reciprocal 2 over 1, which results in 4 pi. Okay, so the maximum is 4, minimum -4. I get that from the amplitude. The period is 4 pi, so I'll label that 4 pi, and then divide that into 4 equal parts. 4 pi divided by 4 is pi. So there's pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi, right? And then negative pi, negative 2 pi, negative 3 pi, negative 4 pi. Okay, and I've got it all labeled, and now I'm ready for my cosine pattern. Cosine always starts at the max and then goes to the middle, minimum, middle, max. On the other side, same pattern. All right, and there you have it. Okay, continuing on, how about number 6 here? We'll try one more. We have a negative, a cosine. So the amplitude is that 3 out front, just positive 3. The period is 2 pi divided by b, which in this case, the b is pi. Here, the pi's cancel, the period is just 2. So if you have a pi as a factor of your x, that's going to cancel, and so your period is going to be, a nice whole number or a fraction, but it won't have pi in it, right? So amplitude max 3, min -3. My period is 2, right? So I'm going to go from -2 to +2. And then this is just kind of simple math to get the intermediate values, right? 2 divided by 4 is a half. So each of these is going to be a half. Half, 1, 3 halves, 2, right? -1 half, -1, -3 halves. So sloppy. Okay. And then I'm ready to draw my cosine pattern, but it's negative. Ooh, don't forget that. Right? So negative cosine, normally it starts up top. Now we got to start down below. And then middle, top, middle, down. And then same thing over here is going to go to the middle, top, middle, below. Okay, there it is. Good times. All right, one more problem. It's going the other way. What if you have the equation and you want to find, you have the graph and you want to find the equation. Tricky. Okay, so first thing I'm going to notice here is the pattern. Is a sine or cosine, right? And it looks like cosine, but flipped over. So I know it's going to be a negative cosine pattern. All right, so I'll make note of that, negative cosine pattern, just by looking at its shape. Okay. Next, I'm going to ask myself, okay, what's the amplitude of this graph? All right, I see that the maximum is 2 and the minimum is -2. So that has an amplitude of 2. Right? And then finally, what is the period of this graph? So a full complete cycle goes from 0 to 4 pi. So the period is 4 pi. Now the period, though, does not appear in the equation. I need to figure out what b equals for the equation, right? So remember the formula for period, it's 2 pi over b. So 2 pi over b should equal 4 pi. So what does b have to be so that this equals 4 pi? I can just do a little algebra, multiply both sides by b, right? And then I've got 2 pi equals 4 pi b. And then finally divide both sides by 4 pi. And then that cancels, that cancels. And so I'm left with b on this side. And over here, 2/4, which is 1/2. So your b is equal to 1/2. Okay. So put it all together now. I know my equation is going to be negative cosine pattern, right? And then I just figured out what the a and the b are. There's your a. A is that amplitude, right? So I have -2 out front, cosine, and then the b we found to be 1/2. Right? So my final answer, -2 cosine 1/2 x. That is the equation of that graph. And it's actually an equation of that graph because these repeat over and over. You could come up with a sine version of that equation that would generate the same graph. Because if you think about the graph starting here, then you have the sine pattern, right? Cosine and sine are very similar. They just are shifted horizontally. Okay, and that's what we'll get into in the next section is horizontal shifts. So right now, we're not worried about that, but we'll get to it. Okay, so that's it for 6.3. Hope the homework goes well. Email me if you have questions. Okay, talk to you later.